Alyn Williams at the Westbury has been open since 2011. How has the journey been for you having your very own restaurant?
It's been a good journey. It's been what I expected, because I've worked for other people and opening restaurants and staying with them for a length of time. So I knew it was going to be tough in the early days, to get recognised. And coming out of somebody else's shadow is always quite a journey in itself. It's a nice journey because you develop your own style. You develop the dining room in the way that you want, and the experience how you want your guests to experience their meal, their dining experience.
How would you sum up the restaurant and your style of cooking to those who may not have heard of or had the chance to dine here?
Well, we're in quite formal surroundings, but it's a relaxed restaurant. So we're as a style of dining, it's really about making people feel comfortable and relaxed and enjoy their time here. So we're not sort of stiff-backed or formal, or particularly formal. It's just professional and relaxed. With the food, I suppose light British flavours, lots of British produce. I suppose the history of it would be kind of based in French cuisine, but then we bring it on and it's quite modern and very light.
How do you think British cuisine has changed in the time since you started your career?
Lots. It's become a different thing altogether. When I started, British cuisine was sneered upon, so you would never say that you cook British food, unless you were doing roast dinners in a pub. Whereas now it's something to be proud of, because I think that from back then in the 80s really to now, it's become recognised as something that's credible, and lots of really good young British chefs have sort of evolved and gone on to then nurture other good British chefs, and they're all doing a really good job.
In addition to your regular menu, you also have a tasting menu dedicated to vegetarian cooking. What was the motivation behind preparing a separate menu that focuses just on vegetables?
Started off really it was my dad grew vegetables when we were kids. We didn't eat a lot of vegetarian food, but he grew a lot of vegetables. So a lot of our food growing up was vegetable based. He grew tons of stuff. But then really, to put on a vegetarian menu in the restaurant was down to my wife. She's vegetarian, so we would go and eat often in nice places, and she would have a poor experience because it was always a second thought of the chef to create vegetarian food. So I promised her, after eating in a 3 Michelin star restaurant where we had one of the worst vegetarian experiences, that if I ever had my own restaurant, I would focus on and look after vegetarians. So that's kind of how it began.
And how would you say this has been received by patrons at the restaurant?
Yeah, really well. Really well. We serve more vegetarian food than I would ever have expected. So even good carnivores will look and choose vegetarian dishes, or they'll come back and have the vegetarian menu because they think that we put a lot of effort into it, so it's quite interesting. It's across the board. And also, if you don't offer good vegetarian food, you're excluding quite a big part of the market these days. And if you do offer the good vegetarian food, then the hosts or the guests are more likely to come to eat at your restaurant because you can offer something to everybody. With our meat dishes, we use a lot of we cook and render the fat from the animal to enhance the flavour of the meat. So we put it into the sauces, or we'll cook the meat in its own fat. With vegetables, it's essentially the same sort of thing. What you do is you use their juice. So a lot of our vegetables we cook in their own juices. For example, we cook celery or carrots in their own juice, which kind of just adds another layer of its own flavour. So it supercharges. Most good chefs are focused on seasonality. It's not particular to what I do, and I think it's important that you kind of harness what's good at that moment. And I mean, micro season is just a term that you might use for something, usually vegetables that or herbs that are in season for a short space of time. So you have your 4 traditional seasons, and then within those 4 seasons, you'll get lots of things that are coming in and out of season at the same time. So, for example, wild garlic, which usually starts in sort of late February to get the tiny shoots, and it becomes more. It becomes almost viral at the end, sort of during March. But by the end of March and April, it's pretty much gone. The same with asparagus, can be a 2-week season. So you're really just taking what's really good now and using that for as long as it's in season, and then once it's gone, and you wait for it to come back again the next year. But that's the best thing about our job, is being creative and talking to the people that are growing our vegetables for us. If we're talking about vegetables, it's all about talking to our farmers, talking to the producers, talking to our suppliers, seeing what they think is best at the time and what they're growing and what's going to be really exciting, and taking all of the things that we already know and trying to do something just a little bit different, a little bit more exciting with it, and developing new dishes. But that's the great thing about what we do, because we can be as safe or as playful as we like.
Which dishes would you say will always be your signature dishes?
I'm not sure that I'd ever say that I've got a signature dish, because that limits you to particular dishes. We've had dishes on the menu for sort of lengths of time, but then they move on and they go, and we may or may not revisit them. But it's very rare that we go back to a whole dish. What you do is you have signature styles or signature things that you will use. So we'll do certain things that will come into play in different dishes along the way. I do with a vegetable. One of the things that I do often is with turnips, and turnips kind of a bit of a probably not that well used vegetable, but I love them because of the style of flavour. And we grate turnips and serve them raw, and it's a bit like horseradish. So we use that it's good with fish, it's really good with beef, but also on vegetarian dishes as well. It's a really nice sort of full flavoured thing that we do. And so that's something that you might see on various dishes over the years. So it's more signature things that we do rather than signature dishes.
You offer a wine and beer pairing service at the restaurant. Could you talk us through this?
Yeah, I mean, wine pairing's a normal thing to offer in a restaurant, but I think the beer pairing was something that we talked about before we opened the restaurant with my restaurant manager, who was really keen to have beers that we could serve along with food. I have to say I was a little bit cynical about that, and I was a bit wary until I got into it, and I met some really good people who are very influential in the beer business. We did a lot of tastings, and I was going to say slowly, but it wasn't slow, it was quick. I quickly realised that pairing beer with food is as easy or as relevant as pairing wine. It's actually probably easier to pair beers than wines, because there's more of a characteristic to a beer. So you get stronger notes in beers. So to actually sort of hone in on the characteristic and the flavours of a beer is sometimes a bit easier than it is with wine. But it's been it's something that we've kept going, and we change all the time. So with every new dish comes a new beer, which is I love it.
How did your professional experiences with Gordon Ramsay and Marcus Waring inform how you run your kitchen today?
Well, they taught me how to be professional. Working for them was an education every day. They have their reputations, but that's really just sort of media. So what you get from them as a chef working next to them every day isn't what they like to portray on television. It's not all about shouting and screaming. It's about being a really good chef, looking after your ingredients really well, and being super professional, but being dedicated to what you do. So they gave me gave a great depth to that.
Some might say that desserts are not as interesting or creative as dishes on the rest of the menu. Why don't fine dining restaurants employ high-profile pastry chefs like they might do in France, for instance?
Okay, I'm not sure that I'd agree that we don't pay as much attention to our desserts. I think the high-profile pastry chef is a bit of a thing of the past. It's not. You don't really see them so much anymore. We do have them in the UK. We've probably got a dozen or so that you would recognise their names, but quite often they then go into consultancy and sort of widen the net, and they sort of teach people how to be good pastry chefs or sort of good dishes to put on menus. You have to pay them a lot as well. They're very expensive. Most restaurants can't afford somebody making just their desserts and paying them an extortionate amount of money. So what we do is we take the people that are very, very good, and we take little bits of inspiration and information from them.
We've just got a few questions to get to know you a little better. What's the best meal that you had lately?
Good friend of mine that worked with me was my sous chef with Marcus Waring. Has got James Knappett. He's got a restaurant called Bubble Dogs, and then he's got Kitchen Table at the back, and I had a fantastic meal in Kitchen Table a couple of weeks ago.
Which is the restaurant that you admire the most?
That's a really hard one. I would say if there was a restaurant that I admire in the world would be Paul Bocuse. He's kind of the grandfather and the living grandfather of really sort of modern French cuisine. He's inspired so many chefs and so many people, and his kind of legacy is everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And so for one living chef now, and his restaurant would be Paul Bocuse out in Lyon.
What's your guilty food pleasure?
It has to be chocolate. Yeah, too much chocolate.
Who cooks at home?
My wife cooks on a daily basis, but I'm not at home very often, so I do cook at home. I cook Sunday lunch.
Would you say that Instagram is good or bad for food?
It's here, and you can't really say too much bad about it, because so many people are taking photographs of their food and posting it on Instagram, and people see what you're doing instantly and go and sort of it inspires people then to come to your restaurant, because if they're looking at great food on Instagram, that kind of whets the appetite. So no, I think it's a good thing. We just started Instagram, actually.
What's the harshest comment you ever received from a customer? Or from a family member?
Oh, I receive harsh comments from my kids all the time, but I don't listen to that very often. I don't get too many harsh comments from customers, but I did once, years ago, serve avocado to somebody who proceeded to eat the whole thing with the skin as well, and told me how disgusting it was. It was his own fault for eating the skin.
Exactly, serves her right. Could you guide us through a typical day here at your restaurant? So from opening up, just talk us through.
Okay. The kitchen opens at 7 o'clock, so the cooks are here from 7 a.m. Even our baker starts at 6. I generally arrive a little bit later than that, so I come in around 8:30, 9 o'clock. I prepare all the fish, so that's kind of my job in the morning. Is that all of the fish comes in fresh every day, and I fillet and portion the fish, and then myself and my head chef will check everybody's section, make sure that everybody's on time, going to be ready for the lunch service and then for the dinner service. And then we start checking the fridges. We taste the food that's been prepared that day. Then at around 11:30 we have a briefing, so we talk through our service and what we're cooking that day, and we come and talk to the front of house. We go through who's guests for the day, who's coming, who we know, what we can expect. Then all the lights go on in the kitchen, all the hot lights go on, everybody cleans down, gets ready, then we proceed with service.
With the Michelin star and plenty of accolades under your belt in such a short amount of time, what can we expect next? What are your plans for the future?
I don't know. I haven't got any plans for the future at the moment. I just plan to keep going with the restaurant, and if we get more accolades, fantastic. But I just want to create a restaurant that's always popular.